Welcome to the College Basketball Road to Madness show. It's almost dancing time, but first, the conference tournaments are here amongst us. Are you ready to get into some conference tournaments, Dynamite?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've made a good bit of money on these smaller conference tournaments this past weekend, so I'm excited to get into some of the bigger ones for sure.
Yeah, before we get into these, let's get into the three that already have automatic bursts as of this recording. Out of the OVC, Murray State 30-2. They were probably going to be an at-large, but I guess that's good for some bubble teams. Really, all three of these teams that got in, probably good for bubble teams because two for sure were definitely teams that might get in if they lost in their conference tournament, and the other one probably wouldn't get in, but certainly had a case for it. But Murray State, what do you make of this team? Nice run through the OVC tournament. Wasn't really challenged even with two other good teams in there.
Yeah, they're just on a roll, and you suggested that they maybe intentionally give up a game to let somebody else in. So I guess they didn't want to do that, and they took care of business.
Yeah, they did. Beating Belmont twice, beating Morehead State 3 times, which always difficult to test to do. Next up, one that's big in my hearts and one I got you to sort of fall in love with. Out of the Big South Conference, the Longwood Lancers defeated the Demon of Winthrop and won pretty easily in that game. I told you about this team early, and they continued their really, really good run and really put it on Winthrop in this one. What do you make of the Longwood Lancers here? Excited that they're going dancing?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I believe this is the first time they've been in the tournament,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. And so they've played really well all year. They've been consistently the best team in that conference all year. You kind of wondered going into that championship game whether just the past experience of Winthrop might come through and show in that game, and Longwood took care of business and dominated from start to finish. So really impressed, and I'd hate to be a team to match up with them in the tournament.
Yeah, and last one, everyone's favorite the last couple of years, out of the Missouri Valley, Loyola Chicago, Edge Drake out of here, 64-58 in this one. Loyola's back in here. Probably the biggest question is, do you think the MVC can get a second one in here? Drake maybe slide in there. I know Northern Iowa was sitting in there. Do you think because Loyola won this thing, it's only going to be one?
Yeah, I think Loyola was the only team capable of getting in on that large. So since they've taken away that automatic bid, that's going to open up another space for another bubble team. I don't think they're going to get somebody else from that conference. This Loyola Chicago team, this is a team that they've been up and down throughout the season, weren't quite as dominant as some people expected them to be. And because of that, I got pretty favorable odds all the way through their conference. I think I took them every game in the conference, and they took care of business. So I quite enjoyed that. And they're playing more like the Loyola Chicago of the previous couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's get into the conference tournaments that are coming up this week. We're going to start with the American Conference. Our boys out of Houston laid a little bit of an egg yesterday. We were in a little bit of talks. You liked Memphis. I was like, that's pretty low for Houston. But I also caveated with said this game is meaningless to Houston. They might not really care, and it means everything to Memphis. And I think the game sort of played out that way. But Houston comes in at your favorite at -120. Then Memphis at +400, a nice late season surge for them. SMU at +650. Tulane comes in at 10-1, Wichita State at 21, Central Florida at 25, Cincinnati at 30, Temple at 30. We won't do those bottom couple teams because I don't think those really, really have a chance. But looking at this conference tournament, does Houston turn it back on here, roll through this tournament? I don't think it's good value at -120, but what are your thoughts here at the American Conference here?
Yeah, I think Houston's definitely got a good shot at winning this thing. Like you said, they may have just taken that last game against Memphis off, just kind of resting up and getting ready up for this tournament because they know that's when they really need to turn it on. But there's no value in taking that Memphis or that Houston there unless you just think they're going to dominate. But I think there's a shot that they could stumble against a couple of these teams. I like Memphis at 400. I think that's the best play. But SMU at 650 is also worth a look. But not too much further down the road. I don't think you can get in this conference. Some other teams, they've had a couple upsets throughout the season, but I don't think they're quite good enough to go all the way through this tournament.
Yeah, you talked about SMU at 650. I think that's probably the best value. They already proved they could beat Memphis a couple times here. Houston, easily the best team in this conference. I was a little shocked Temple's getting 30-1 because they do have wins over SMU and Memphis and teams like that. They haven't shown the ability to beat Houston, or even come close to Houston. And in the matchup versus SMU, that was in SMU. SMU dominated them pretty good, but maybe take a flyer there on the 30-1 long shot on Temple. I thought might be, half all right. That being said, they run into Houston, of course, in that semifinal, playing Tulane in that first matchup. So a Tulane, Houston back-to-back there, you can sort of see where they're sitting 30-1. And then you're probably going to have to deal with Memphis or SMU in that final. So if they go through all three of those, you probably definitely deserve the 30-1 on that one. I didn't see much value anywhere else. Tulane 10-1. They've been a little spunky at times, but that's more so on their home court. I don't know if they go to a neutral site and be able to run it. You said Memphis at 400. Can Memphis put together, 3 or 4 good games here? They did get a nice spot in that bracket. They avoid Houston until the final. So they play the USF South Florida winner and then the SMU probably over the Tulsa-Wichita State one. So do you think Memphis can make that run and win this thing and win 3 straight, theoretically, over Houston here?
Well, it's like you said, more than likely they're going to get a matchup with SMU right before the championship get with Houston. So that really plays into Houston's favor because they've kind of got it easy on their side.
Yeah.
And, Memphis, while I think they're better than SMU and can get through that game, I don't know if they can win that and then the very next day take down Houston as well. But so I really think the bet is who you think is going to win between that Memphis and SMU.
Yeah.
And then you take that value going up against Houston. But it's lining up well for Houston to have an easy ride through this tournament.
Yeah, it was interesting the way this bracket broke. On Houston's side, you got East Carolina, Cincinnati, Tulane, Temple, all 4 of which are somewhat competent basketball teams. And then on the SMU-Memphis side, you have Central Florida, South Florida, Tulsa, Wichita State. And really, only Central Florida has shown to have a lot of life on that side of it. So it certainly looks like SMU-Memphis probably going to be that showdown in the semifinal. So, you could, if you think they can beat Houston, you probably do have pretty good value taking that 400 or 650. Now, if you don't think they can beat Houston, I wouldn't go for it, but pretty decent value because they're going to be heavily favored in their first game, either one of them, and then, head-to-head, they'll probably be, I'd say SMU a slight favorite, but SMU has beat Memphis twice now, so beating them 3 times, always difficult. But interesting tournament. Any value in that Houston minus 120? It just, like I said, that they're in I'd say the harder part of the bracket, even though they're the number 1 seed.
Well, I mean, and you could probably get that Houston around minus 120 in a game versus a Memphis or SMU in the championship game. And I'd say the spread would be pretty low-ish if that were to happen. I say if they meet up with Memphis, the spread would be probably about 2-4. With SMU, it'd be about 4-6. But you can get close to that value in that one game. So I don't know if it's worth putting a shot on Houston.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, especially after, from that spread I saw last night now, I think that'll probably be adjusted, go up to about 4 or so in the championship game if they match up. But I don't think there's too much of great value in that one. All right. Let's move on to the ACC. This one's interesting because honestly, I think there's some pretty decent value here, pretty deep in this tournament. Now, this It will be tough going into those quarterfinal matchups because then they all start meeting each other. All these teams, I think, could be in there. But Duke is minus 130. Interesting. And then it jumps huge. I think this sort of shows nobody really knows who the second best team in the ACC is. Wake at plus 900. Notre Dame at plus 900. North Carolina at plus 950. Virginia Tech at 11-1. Miami at 12-1. Virginia at 17-1. Then it drops off. Syracuse 50-1. Florida State 50-1. Louisville and Clemson at 90-1. NC State, Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, Boston College. If you think those teams are going to make it, take that and then start betting money line in each individual game because you'll make yourself a lot of money. But I don't think any of those are going to make a run. But this is an interesting one here because the favorite drops so much. And I think, just proven off Saturday, a lot of these teams are capable of beating Duke. So how do you sort of handicap this ACC conference here? Value your overall pick?
Well, there's three teams I really are looking at. Those are the first three right behind Duke at getting plus 900 and 950 for North Carolina. And then it's really just kind of pick your horse that you like the best and ride it. But in my opinion, I think North Carolina is the best pick because when they're playing right, I think they're one of the best teams in the country. Now, that's a big if. They have some days where they show up and they shoot like 20%. They can't.
And they still give up 50% shooting on the other side.
But when they're hitting their shots, they're going to be very hard to beat. And I think that plus 950 is really good value. And I also like Notre Dame. I think they've been kind of steady. Not on a whole lot of streaks, but they seem to usually string across 3 or 4 wins in between each loss. So they've kind of been slow and steady throughout this whole conference. And they may be able to put it together for 4 in a row for this conference tournament. But I'm not quite as big on Wake. I think you favor Wake a little bit, but they've kind of been hot and cold for me as well. So my choice is North Carolina. And then there's a little bit guys that you can get some value further down. Main one in them is probably Miami. And we've been talking that they could have a depth issue come tournament season, game after game after game. Fatigue could play a factor, but they're definitely talented enough when they're playing good to take down these big guys. And also, another one that I've got a little bit of an eye on is that Florida State at 50-1. They beat Duke early in the season, so they're capable. They haven't been playing that great the second half of the season, but anything goes for tournament season. So the regular season goes out the window, and we all play. Some people have a little bit of a better seeding in this conference tournament, but that value for Florida State may be worth a look as well. Yeah,
you mentioned it. Duke at 130. But the one that came right out, North Carolina at plus 950. They finally got sort of one of those tier wins and showed they could, at least beat one of the teams that are, top 10, top 15 type teams. I think we've said all season long, they certainly have the talent to do it. It's if they can put it together consistently game to game. But 950, really, really good value. You don't usually get 950 for the North Carolina Tar Heels to win the ACC tournament. You talked about it, Notre Dame, Wake. I probably put them in the same sort of. I don't think I'd touch that just because I don't trust Wake to make a long run and beat 3 or 4 really good teams in this. And then Notre Dame, I just don't trust their play style in tournaments like this. They're going to have one of those games where they shoot bad, pace is going to be slow, and they'll probably lose to one of the better teams talent wise. You talked about Miami, Florida, 12-1. I don't know if they have the depth, but they certainly, that top 5 of theirs certainly is as talented as any of the teams in the ACC. Virginia at 17-1. I also had my eye on just because they're experienced enough to make a run. I don't think they can make a run through it. They haven't shown enough consistency either, but 17-1, pretty good value there. And you talked about Florida State. They had a lot of their players injured this last half of the season. If those guys are healthy and playing well, they could certainly make a run. And with 50-1, I mean, there's nothing. You put a $10 bet on that, and you're going home with, $500 there. So that's not going to hurt anybody. So maybe a flyer on that one. Maybe a little bit more serious push on North Carolina. Miami and Virginia. any real thought if you had a sort of budget that they could make a run, or, it's just sort of a flyer on it?
And I don't know so much because, they're going to have to go through two of those top tier teams.
Yeah.
Whether it be
Speaking of the matchup, Florida State plays Syracuse, and then their next game, if they beat Syracuse, which is 50-50, is Duke. So they got to go Syracuse, Duke, and then they, it balances out there because then it's Miami, Wake, Boston College, Pitt on that side. You probably get by, but that second game is on Duke on Florida State's side. On Miami and Clemson's side, it's a little bit, different. Virginia's sitting there playing the Louisville, Georgia Tech winner. Then they get North Carolina and Miami, Florida. Their run to it is a little bit easier than Virginia's, but it's still a pretty difficult run there. Wake, Boston College, Pitt. So you think probably Wake Forest, Miami matching up on their first game. You like them in that one. Maybe Florida State brings that win and then Miami makes that jump. But you're asking a lot, both of Miami or Florida State, because they're going to play Duke early in this tournament. So you probably got to factor that a little bit.
Yeah, and the other thing is if you get Florida State or Miami, versus a Duke or a North Carolina or a matchup, you're going to get money line value, probably close to the conference odds, because they're going to be big-time dogs to those bigger teams.
Yeah.
Especially if Florida State we saw lose by like 40 the last time they played North Carolina.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You think about it, they're going to be underdogs in 3 of those, probably 5 to 6 to 1 in Duke, probably 4 to 5 to 1 in, versus North Carolina. And then you don't have the factor of maybe accidentally losing to a Syracuse or something factored in there. So
that's why I think that value for North Carolina plus 950 is the way to go, because you think about it, North Carolina will probably be favored in every matchup until they maybe play Duke.
Yeah,
in the championship
I think
game.
so. Maybe Notre Dame, but even there, I think they wouldn't dare make that a favorite because everybody would then put money on North Carolina, thinking you're handing us points there. So, I mean, you're exactly right. And North Carolina is basically going to be favored in every game to Duke. And judging from the last game, I don't think Duke would be more than maybe 4 or 5 points favorite in a neutral venue game. So, I think the value sitting at 950 there really lays with, the ACC and North Carolina. Maybe splash a token bet on Florida State. If you got a free bet, maybe throw one on there. Maybe their guys all get healthy and they make a run, and you're a couple dollars richer in that one. One we didn't talk about, they still have odds on it. The American East Conference. Vermont's way ahead.
Oh yeah.
But that's why I'm bringing this up. Is there any chance any of these can maybe sneak a win over Vermont? Really, the only one who has inequality is Maryland, Baltimore County. Yeah. Even then, I wanted to see if you maybe throw a shtickle on one of these and see if Vermont blows it.
I don't think you can look at this and predict any kind of upset. Now, that being said, March Madness miracles happen. I think that's what it would take for one of these teams to upset Vermont.
Yeah. Maybe Baltimore County at 7-1, but that being said, honestly, if they get in the championship game, I think Vermont's an 11-point favorite. So you might not want to take the risk of losing to one of the other ones on that one and just play the championship game if they get there. But nonetheless, I wanted to see if maybe you were going to throw something on a long shot on the American East. We'll go to a conference I think both of us have been entertained by most of the year. Interesting odds in this one, I thought. Davidson comes in as the favorite, plus 330. Dayton just behind them at plus 360. VCU at plus 380, St. Bonaventure's at 550, St. Louis at 6-1, Richmond 950 at 9-1, George Mason at plus 1500. I drew my line there, sort of at teams I thought could win it. Fordham 100-1, Rhode Island 100-1, UMass 120. George Washington 250, probably draw another line there, and then have the complete no-hopers I'd go with. But what do you make of this one? basically the top three teams all almost 4-1, and then easily the next three teams, who I think none of us would be stunned if they won it, sitting at 5, 6, and 9-1 here. This one's an interesting one to handicap. I'm wondering where you're sort of sitting in your headspace here.
Well, there's out of those first four, there's two I really like. I like Davidson. I know they're only plus 330, but that's still decent value for the favorites. And I like St. Bonaventure at plus 550. They started to play a little bit better towards the end of the year. But really my value pick, and I think this is a sneaky good pick, is Richmond at plus 950. They've been playing really solid, especially on the road, and I think that's what's going to take come tournaments time.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I really liked Richmond at plus 950, and they got a decent little run here because on their side of the bracket, they're going to play the Rhode Island Duquesne winner. I don't think you worry about either of those teams. So then you got that matchup with VCU. That's, just a huge rivalry game, so anything can go there. And then you're in the semis. So I think there's really, really good value there in a game they'll be heavily favored in a game that the line probably will be in and around even. So at 950, I really, really like that value. You mentioned Davidson. I think that's pretty good value for Davidson there at plus 330. Yep. The only problem with it is basically this conference, is a bloodbath, and a lot of these teams can lose to anybody. So it wouldn't be stunning if they lost, outright. So this might be one where you're better taking game to game and just, I think basically after those bottom teams, Davidson wouldn't be favored by more than 3 or 4 points really versus any of these, top tier teams. So basically every game once you get to the quarters is going to be, between 2 and 4 point spreads one side or the other. So it basically will be in and around even money. I was curious about the VCU one plus 380. Solid value there. They've beaten a lot of these teams. Do you think they can make a run here in this tournament at plus 380?
Yeah, it's like you said. I think a lot of these teams are capable, especially with how tough this is going to be. So, and VCU's got a little bit of the pedigree. I'd say out of those top four, the only one I'm really not a big believer in is Dayton. When they just have some ugly games where they don't show up, and it gets a little rough. But yeah, VCU definitely. I'd love to see that VCU Richmond matchup again. I think they split the regular season. So we'll see how that goes. But, I think you can't go wrong with Davidson and then maybe taking a shot with a Richmond.
Yeah, I like the Richmond. I'm going to talk about St. Louis, too. LaSalle St. Joseph, the winner of that will be their first round matchup, so you probably move them easily on. And then they play their bugaboo, St. Bonaventure's. They're 0 for 2 in there, so you either are riding one side where this team owns them and they're going to win 3 straight times. But, I've watched these two teams play. They're very, very similar in talent levels. So there might be some value there at the 6-1 because then they're on it. They will play St. Bonaventure's, then Davidson, then the championship game. So I've seen a lot from St. Louis. Now their last month of the season, they have not played well. So, you factor that in. But it seems like a nice matchup to get into that quarters and play a team you've lost to twice. You might be able to get over the hump that third time, get you into the semis where it presents some value there. And I think they match up pretty good versus Davidson overall. Any of these other sort of long shots you want to take? I highlighted George Mason just because they've been able to beat a handful of these top teams. If you were looking for a real sort of long shot at like 150-1, they've been able to beat a couple of these top teams, so they could clearly at times play with them. I don't know if they can make a long run, but anyone else past George Mason, I think is a no-go. Any of them you sort of think might can make a run?
No, not really. Rhode Island showed some glimmers earlier on this season, but they've kind of fallen off. And I don't think they stand up to much of these other guys.
Yeah, I didn't know maybe you were jumping on the George Washington train, but they can't play LaSalle, St. Joseph's, and Duquesne throughout the whole tournament. All right, let's move on to the Big 12. This one is kind of fun because I was stunned. Kansas not the favorite out and out in this one. So Baylor at plus 230, Kansas just underneath that at 260, Texas Tech. Nice value there at 380. Just a hedge on what I'm looking at here. Texas 650, TCU at 1600, Oklahoma at 16 to 1. Iowa State at 19 to 1. How the mighty have fallen. I think 2 or 3 weeks ago when we did our show, we probably would have been stunned. Iowa State at 19 to 1 after they had won a couple games, but they've gone totally in the tank. Kansas State at 32 to 1 and West Virginia. I thought this was a nice value there at 35 to 1. I was like, well, I don't think they're that bad. So what do you make of this Big 12 tournament here?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that was actually the first one that jumped out at me looking at this conference odds was that West Virginia. Yeah, they've lost a lot of games here, but I'm pretty sure they still have a very experienced coach there in Bob Huggins and a lot of tournament experience. And, you know, anything can happen in these games. And I think 35 to 1, I don't think they're the worse than – I think they're better than Kansas State or Iowa State right now.
Yeah.
They just played a really good game against Texas Tech a few days ago. Now that was at West Virginia, but I think it's worth a look. You know, maybe a free bet, a little bit of money here. But then aside from that, my pick's got to be Baylor. Texas Tech's proven you can't trust them. Kansas, outside of the Allen Fieldhouse, they're really iffy. Baylor's been the more consistent team. I think that's the no-brainer pick.
Yeah, certainly so. And the West Virginia at 35 to 1, I thought was really good value. They're open with Kansas State. And then basically you get that game versus Kansas right off the bat. And yeah, it's a long shot, but basically if you take that Kansas game, you sort of absorb that number 1 seed's path. So, I mean, West Virginia is not as good as they've been, but you know, you go back before they entered the conference schedule, they had wins over UConn and stuff. I think we all thought they were a solid, low-tier tournament team entering the season. It's just been a little bit of a meat grinder in that Big 12 conference. They sort of couldn't get up after losing games in a row, but they don't totally get blown out in a lot of these games, especially at home. So they're in there. They play a style of play that's annoying. And as these teams wear down in the tournament too, I think it might be more and more difficult to play, versus West Virginia. Now, that being said, they do have to get through Kansas State and then Kansas really to get any value there. But 35 to 1, I just thought was a little bit of craziness here for a team that I think's pretty solid. And, if they upset somebody like Kansas, I wouldn't be, oh my God, that's an amazing, pick, because head-to-head, they're probably 8 to 1 underdog in that Kansas game. So basically, you're getting pretty good value there. I didn't like either of the top 2 teams' value, Baylor or Kansas, 260, 230. It's just been too inconsistent throughout this Big 12. Anyone can lose to anyone. The one I had highlighted was Texas Tech at plus 380. They've had a little bit of a struggle here towards the tail end, but 4 to 1, I thought presented pretty good value there.
Yeah, I mean, they were dominating the conference there for a while, and they went into Texas, got a big win at Texas.
Yeah.
So, and they've got good defense, and I think they've got the most Tier 1 wins in the country this year, Texas Tech. I think they've got something like 11 or 12 Tier 1 wins now. It helps when there's 4 of them in your conference.
That is correct. That does certainly does help.
I don't know. Just something about me and the feeling with Texas Tech I don't think they're going to be doing it this year.
Yeah. Let's go to the mid-tier here. TCU, Oklahoma, Iowa State. They've shown some ability to play with the, upper tier here. Make a run at any of those 3, or just they've all sort of died on the vine here.
Yeah, TCU, they had a really good run about a month ago. They've kind of fallen off that high. I think if this had been a few weeks ago, I may have been a little bigger on TCU, but I've taken them a few times since then, and they let me down. So I'm not a huge believer in TCU. I think, when you get down to those teams, you got to go with the value, and I think it's an Iowa State.
Yeah.
Once you get between those 3. I think skill level, you could probably put them all on the same level playing field. Iowa State's probably got the more potential out of those three. So I think you might be better off taking Iowa State at the 19-1 between those.
Yeah, the only one I could see is maybe throw a little bit on Iowa State, just because, like I said 3 or 4 weeks ago, we would have been stunned, sitting at 19-1. So probably a little bit of value there. But this one's a pretty hard one to handicap, mostly like it's been a hard one to sort of bet on all year long because, just so many good teams in this conference. Let's move to your favorite, the Big East.
Oh, yeah.
This one's going to be fun. Villanova plus 165. UConn comes in at 350. Providence at 500. I might be back on the Providence bandwagon here.
Didn't they win the conference?
Yes, I know. We hopped on early. I think we bailed off towards that end of the year when they started getting amazing wins. But plus 500 for the conference winner. I'm a little bit excited about. Pretty good value there in Marquette at 7-1. Creighton at 14-1 presents pretty good value. Seton Hall 16-1. Xavier 19-1. And, honestly, I throw a flyer here. St. John's, Butler, and DePaul, I think, could all win it too at 27, 35, and 65-1. They've all played good basketball at some point in their season. So basically just Georgetown would be the only one. I totally make a red cross off on here. But that being said, last year, they ran a miracle through. Now, I think both you and I said they were hot, though, towards the end of last year. They certainly are not hot towards the end of this year. So this Big East one, how are you handicapping this puppy? Because I basically just read off every team in the conference and said there might be a chance they could get hot and get on a run here.
Yeah, I think outside of Georgetown, this is anybody's game. All right, and I think you can find some really good value deeper. Xavier's had a lot of struggles this year, but I think they're still a really talented team. St. John's, they're a little worrisome in tournament because they rely so much on their shooting, and so if they go cold, they're just get killed.
But it could be the other way too. They get hot, and I mean, we just saw it in the women's SEC tournament. Kentucky shooters got hot for a 3-day stretch and ran through the women's tournament draining a bunch of threes. So it could be either way. They could be bounced or they could get hot and cruise through here.
So, I mean, a case could be made for any of these teams, I think, outside of Georgetown. We've seen DePaul get some big wins. Butler, I'm not quite as big on them as I would actually probably take DePaul over Butler, even though they're getting double their odds. But I like Xavier plus 1,900 and Providence plus 500. I find it very odd that, this team that's in the top 10 in the country won the conference and they're getting them plus 500 odds to win the tournament. So I think that's definitely worth a look.
Yeah, you mentioned it first off the bat, Providence at plus 500. That's extreme value for the team that won the conference. And basically the only team they couldn't beat was Villanova. So, I go right for value there. I didn't see a ton of value in Villanova or UConn, but I mean, I wouldn't fault anybody taking there, but I think there's so many good teams behind them that presents much, much better value. I probably wouldn't grab the Marquette at 7-1 just because they're really weird and they're in one of their down stretches. Now, that being said, maybe this tournament flicks on one of their on stretches and then they roll through and beat everybody. But I had Creighton at 14-1 since they've moved into the Big East Conference 7 years ago. They've been in the title game 3 times. So that's just off of about 50% they make it to the title game. They're 0-3 in the title game, but if they get to the title game and you're holding 14-1 in any of these matchups, that spread is not going to be more than about 3. So there is a little value there in Creighton, who's shown they've been pretty good in this tournament. honestly, Seton Hall right now might be playing the best of any of these teams. They just went into Creighton and won at 16-1. You talked about Xavier at 19-1. At one point, we probably thought this was the second best team in this conference. They've had a really, really bad stretch here and probably played their way out of the tournament, but this tournament is now a chance to play their way back into the tournament here. So 19-1 presents value. We talked about St. John's at 27-1. They are capable of beating anybody. DePaul's interesting too. They have some pretty big, wins on their schedule. I probably wouldn't do Butler, but Butler is a veteran team who basically has been in the tournament with all these guys, numerous years in a row. So I can't quite mark them out. They just had one of these seasons where they can't seem to find wins. So I think highlighting wise, I'd probably highlight Providence, Creighton, and Seton Hall as my three that I would personally bet on. But you could theoretically probably on any given day and a couple drinks and get me to bet on any one of these Big East teams, because this is just going to be a fascinating tournament, I think, overall.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm interested to see what kind of matchups fall. We've been seeing big game after big game throughout this regular season, and it's going to be interesting to see how some of these teams compete when it's all on the line.
Yeah. Who would you hone your money on the Big East if I had to limit you to maybe two or three?
If I took three, it'd be Providence, Xavier, and DePaul.
Yeah.
Would be my three.
You're going with Providence to stay straight and then seeing if one of these two other teams can find their sort of rhythm and get hot.
Yeah, Xavier's kind of my medium chance, and then DePaul a long shot.
All right, let's move to one we haven't talked a ton about. I mentioned Montana State a little bit this year. I've mentioned Weber State a little bit this year. I think I talked a little Southern Utah, but this isn't one we go over a ton, but I do like the Big Sky, and this one's interesting because there's 3 or 4 teams, I think, also in this one that can make a run here. The aforementioned Montana State at plus 190. Southern Utah at plus 350. Weber State, the sort of dominant team in this conference for most of its time here, at plus 410. Northern Colorado at plus 550. A solid Montana team at 10-1, and a okay Eastern Washington team at 10-1. After that, there's a pretty big drop off. Portland State, Sacramento State, Idaho State, Northern Arizona. I'd probably cross all those teams off, but that list there, I think probably you could talk your way into finagling into this tournament. Where are you looking at here in this group?
I off the bat, Montana State plus 190 in a conference like this, it's actually decent value for the favorite.
Yeah.
Because the bottom 2/3 of this conference have no legitimate shot at winning this. But the Weber State at plus 410 is really good value too. Like you said, they've been there a lot. So that might be a good place to trust your money as well. I don't have a whole lot of analysis for this conference, so those are the two that I'm looking at. But I'd probably take Weber State just because the value is a little better than Montana State.
Yeah, you talked about it. Weber State, pretty good value. The only thing that concerned me about Weber State, their first round matchup versus Montana, and then their second round matchup probably versus Montana State. That's a tough twosome for any of those groups. I look pretty hard at the Southern Utah here because I think they have a pretty decent road. They play the Portland State, Idaho State winner. Pretty easy there. And then Northern Colorado will match up Eastern Washington, Northern Arizona. I think Eastern Washington moves on. Of those teams, Eastern Washington can spring an upset. They're pretty solid. So you could find a way where Southern Utah, could match up Portland State, Idaho State. If Eastern Washington makes a run, then they're matching up with Eastern Washington. That gets them into the finals. So, analytically speaking, I think probably Southern Utah at 350 makes pretty good sense there. The value at 410 for Weber State's pretty good, other than their tough road. But 2-1, Montana State, who's been really, really good all year long, I think is pretty good value there. So I might highlight Montana State, Southern Utah, take the first two, and see what I could get from that group there.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to your favorite conference, to discuss and bet on the Big Ten Conference. Are we hot on the Nebraska after a huge win last night? Do we think they can make the run? Because now would be the time to grab them. All right, Purdue plus 190, Illinois plus 320, Iowa plus 460, Wisconsin plus 700, Ohio State 12-1, Michigan 17-1, Indiana 25-1, Michigan State 25-1, Rutgers 30-1. Pretty big drop off. Northwestern 100, Penn State 180, Maryland 250, Nebraska 500, Minnesota 500. The aforementioned Nebraska 500-1. I don't know. Maybe Fred Hoiberg finally has him playing the last game of the season, shooting him off into the Big Ten tourney to make a big run here. But how do you sort of handicap this one?
There's one that really jumps out at me, and that's Wisconsin plus 700. They've been really steady most of the year, other than a couple oddball losses, like losing to Rutgers at home. But other than that, they've kind of been slowly sneaking up the rankings without a whole lot of talk about them, and they're playing really good basketball. They've got one of the Player of the Year candidates on their team. So I think 7-1 is pretty good value. I don't trust Purdue's defense. Illinois, I think, relies too much on Kofi Cockburn. Now, he may be also the Player of the Year, and he can pretty much dominate anybody in the paint. Iowa can't play defense either, just like Purdue. I'd be interested to see a Purdue-Iowa matchup that might be a 90-95 game. Michigan State at 25-1 is another one to think about. They've yet to really prove it this year, but I don't think you can count out Tom Izzo and the experience of the Spartans either.
Yeah, I got a couple teams I'm looking here, and you'll be shocked by this, but I actually think there's pretty good value there at Purdue at almost 2-1. I think they're one of these teams that sort of takes this tournament pretty serious. They like hanging that sort of Big Ten Conference Championship banner. I don't know about the rest of these teams, how much they're probably going to be focused on Ncaa tournament. So I like that Purdue at 2-1. They have been the best team in the conference, technically speaking. Illinois, I think, is a big game team. They sort of step up in big game matchups. 3-1, though, I didn't love. You could almost talk me into Michigan at 17-1 with value there. They've played pretty good basketball here towards the end of the season, so maybe grab that.
They get Juwan Howard back.
Yeah, and Howard's back. So I don't know. 17-1 seems pretty good value. I don't think I could talk myself into Rutgers, but they're sort of a pain in the ass to play. So, if you don't want to get into a scrap in, a conference championship game and are wanting to just go home and not be bruised for your NCAA tournament experience, you might sort of lay down versus Rutgers team. Now, I don't think they have the scoring to make a run, but 30-1 here. But honestly, I think I'd just grab Purdue at the 2-1 and take that value. They'll probably be favored in every game they play, so it seems like okay value for a team that I know takes a Big Ten Conference tournament seriously and probably will try to win it. All right, let's move out west to the Big West. And I know because I think I've talked about this conference maybe once or twice on this show. So I'm curious to see where you're going with this one, because these games are difficult because they're all played at 11 o'clock and midnight here. So, and basically you're only looking at a score at 3 in the morning when you come in. But the Big West, UC Irvine closed the season really, really hot. They take over as a favorite here at 280. UC Santa Barbara at 410. Long Beach State at 480. Hawaii at 5-1. Fullerton at 7-1, and Cal Riverside at 7-1. UC Davis, Bakerfield, Cal Poly Slow, and Northridge I don't think have much of a chance. Maybe Davis, they have a couple decent wins on the season in conference at 14-1. The others, definite no-goes. But give me your Big West thoughts here.
I don't have a whole lot of them. I'm going to be honest. I haven't watched a whole lot of this basketball in this conference. I think I looked at a few earlier in the year with the Irvine and Long Beach State. I think those are the two to look at. But, you get into these smaller conferences. If you go outside the favorite, the odds of winning it are very, very low. You're usually seeing the top dog taking this one. So I'd have to take UC Irvine at almost 3-1.
All right. I'm going to throw a couple in here. Long Beach State, who actually won the conference at plus 480. I really, really like that value. They've been a little undervalued all, year long. Pretty good value there. Dan Munson, coaching that team, the originator of Gonzaga basketball. So pretty good value at 480 there. But the one I really, really like is Hawaii at 5-1. I think they actually have the best talent of any of these teams in conference. They're a little handicapped because, of course, they're Hawaii. They play their basketball in Hawaii. So when they have to play a basketball game in California during the week, that means they fly from Hawaii to California. So they get a little bit handicapped playing those road games. So I think taking this tournament to a stationary venue where they aren't traveling back and forth, they'll have 3 or 4 days here to climatize. They get that bye so they don't play to Thursday. I think Hawaii at 5-1 presents really, really good value because I think they're actually the most talented team out of this group. And without having to travel, I think they could make a run on this. So I like the Hawaii 5-1, and I like the value in Long Beach, who actually out and out won this conference a little bit like Providence at 480. So that being said, Irvine has been the hottest team, and Santa Barbara was at the beginning of the year the team that was picked to win the conference. So you got those two in there, but basically I think you have those 4 teams. Big cutoff, Fullerton, Riverside, big cutoff, and you're going Davis, Bakerfield. So I think there's really, really good value in Long Beach and Hawaii, and I really, really like Hawaii. I think they have the talent, and with the non-travel being an issue, I think they can put it together and maybe win this tournament.
Yep.
All right, our analysis on the Big West tournament here. We'll move on to Conference USA. This one you've paid a little bit more attention to. So, most of them are on East and Central Coast time as well. So, and they aren't on the bottom of the sports making book sheet either. I think that's the other problem is all those Big West teams get shoved down there all the way at the bottom. And when you're scanning through a sheet of 90 games on a day by games 85 through 90, you're a little bit weary. All right, so this one's going to be a tough one, because there are a couple teams in here who could definitely win this. UAB plus 170, North Texas plus 185, Louisiana Tech 850, Western Kentucky 950, Middle Tennessee at 10-1, Florida Atlantic at 18-1, UTEP at 35-1, Charlotte at 40-1. After that, I'd probably cut it off with anybody with a true chance to win it. Old Dominion, Rice, FIU, Marshall, UT San Antonio, and Southern Miss. Not a whole lot of a chance on that one. But what are you thinking of this one? Couple really, really dominant teams. I got a couple long shots I think could make a run here, though.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna take one of these two favorites to win the conference, I actually like North Texas over UAB. But I actually think there's much better value found a little further in. And I really like Louisiana Tech at the plus 850, and MTSU, Middle Tennessee at 10-1. I think is good value too. They've shown they can beat pretty much anybody in this conference. They tend to play a lot better at home, so I'm interested to see how it'll go in a neutral site. But I think the value you're getting with those picks, who will probably be semifinal teams, is a good shot.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it, MTSU, really, really good value at 10-1. How they play on a neutral venue, I don't know. They've been great, playing at home. A little more shaky on the road. You don't know quite what that means in a neutral site. North Texas has been my team all year. I've been telling you about them. 185 I don't think is great value, though I do think they're better than UAB. But, They could lose to Louisiana Tech. They could lose to UAB. I don't know if they got there, if they'd lose to a Middle Tennessee, Florida Atlantic, or a Western Kentucky. But Middle Tennessee, probably the best value at 10-1. I would probably ride North Texas, but that's one of those where I'd ride North Texas game to game. I think that would be better value. I don't think they'd be much more than 4 to 6 point favorites in the quarters. And then once you get to the semis and the final, I think those are basically pick-em games if they get, any team that's not an upset team getting there. So I think that would present more of a value. The long shot I'm looking at is UTEP. They just came off a win, beating North Texas. Now, North Texas didn't have anything to play for, but you go back a couple games before that, they played UAB in UAB. That was a 3-point loss, tight game. They could have stolen that one. So they've shown the ability to, play with some of these top teams. They've gotten better here the last couple months. So 35-1, if you're looking for a long shot, I think UTEP's one of those that you might stare at. But I think you're probably best riding value-wise Middle Tennessee and then grabbing North Texas, who's been the best team in this conference pretty much throughout, and put it on UAB and Louisiana Tech pretty good when they played each other.
So neither one of us big fans of UAB.
No, neither of us are big fans of UAB. I just, at 170, I don't see the value there, especially when they played North Texas, got beat really good. They did beat Louisiana Tech, but they struggled with Middle Tennessee. And, I mentioned they struggled with UTEP there as well. I don't see value in the UAB at plus 170. All right, let's go to the Ivy League. This one, just the 4 teams qualify for this tournament. Princeton, Yale, Penn, Cornell. I don't really think there's but 2 teams that could probably win this, so I don't know if I'd take the Princeton plus 120, Yale's 220, Pennsylvania's 420, Cornell's 550. How are you sort of handicapping this one? I don't think there's any value in taking Princeton at plus 120 here, 2 games to play.
No, and interesting tidbit, this is the first Ivy League tournament that Harvard has not qualified since there's been an Ivy League tournament. So we're not seeing Harvard here. I think Princeton's the clear favorite. You don't watch a whole lot of these basketball games either. Princeton really, has been the most consistent team throughout the season, but we'll see what happens. I don't think it's really worth throwing too much money at these games. No,
the only thing I'd say is Yale at 220. They should have a pretty good walkthrough versus Penn or Cornell. Like I said, Princeton, Yale have been much better than those other 2 teams. So then you're getting, I think the head-to-head matchup of Princeton and Yale would be less than 220. I think it'd probably be more in the 150 value. So, I mean, I might throw something on that, but basically I think this is just a tournament. If you want or have a good feel, take game to game because honestly, even Princeton playing Cornell, I don't think that would be all that much more than an 6-point spread overall. So I would lean Yale at 220 just because of the value, but I think this is a game-to-game tournament. All right, let's go to the Mid-Atlantic Athletic Conference. This one's going to be interesting because I don't tend to go with favorites, and I certainly don't go with favorites who are minus, but I actually saw value here in this one. Iona at minus 110, St. Pete at 320, Monmouth at 650, and honestly, that's a drop-off because I don't think any of these other teams are even remotely capable of playing with any of those 3 teams, and certainly not Iona. But Marist 14-1, Niagara 16-1. You could talk me into Siena 22-1. Also, they've been okay throughout the year. And then you're going Fairfield, Quinnipiac, Canisius, Ritus, Manhattan. None of those. But where are we looking here in the Mid-Atlantic Conference?
I think this is a situation where Iona pretty much has known all year that they're the best team in this conference. I think they slept through this regular season. They got a couple of weird losses, one where I happened to bet on them, so that was slightly irritating. I think they're going to win this conference tournament, no doubt. So I think minus 110 is pretty good for what is almost a sure thing.
Yeah. That's where I'm going. Minus 110. Honestly, I think that is ridiculously good value here because even versus St. Peter Monmouth, they're going to be 9, 10, 11 point favorites in this. So, I mean, if you could grab the 110, I'd grab it and write it here, and take even money because they aren't going to be even money at any matchup, even in the final. If you were looking for a long shot, the only one I could say is Monmouth 650. They have a couple, transfers and a good coach in King Rice that could spring, an upset or two. But 650, pretty good value. There's a pretty solid chance they end up losing out to Iona, but 650 is about all I could say Monmouth might grab, but honestly, the value there, I'd ride Iona and take that even money value and enjoy your winnings because they have a talent level that's way above everybody else in this tournament.
Yeah, it'd be a shock for them to lose any of these games. A huge upset, like you said, close to double digits for each matchup. So, the almost even money to win is pretty good.
Yeah. All right. This one should be a fun one, too. We followed this conference pretty heavy. Toledo comes in at plus 155. I was a little shocked. Ohio came in second favorite at 240. Kent State at 600. Buffalo at 700. Akron at 750. Pretty good cutoff after those. Those 5 teams, I think, are really, really good, teams here for this conference tournament. Miami, Ohio, 23-1. Ball State, 42. Central Michigan at 18. What are you liking here in the MAC? Toledo has basically taken those top 3 or 4 teams and beaten them by 20-plus points every time they've played them. But do they trip over themselves here? Because a couple of these teams are pretty good teams here.
Yeah, I like Toledo. They've played really good this year. But another one I'm looking at maybe is Kent State at 6-1. I think they're capable of beating this Toledo team. But neutral site tournament games, anything can happen. I just don't know if I like the plus 155 with Toledo as much. They're not nearly as clear-cut favorites as Iona was in the previous conference. Yeah. I could see Toledo potentially losing to about 4 or 5 of these teams or winning them all. So it's kind of one of those that you might just look at your odds game to game throughout this tournament in this conference. It might be a better use of your money than just picking one horse and riding with it the whole way.
Yeah. I think what scares me here is because, Toledo killed every one of these sort of top teams every time they played, where you talked about it in the Mid-Atlantic where Iona had a couple, stunning losses here and there where they looked like they were sleepwalking through the conference. And I'm, it sounds stupid, but I sort of wanted that for Toledo. I wanted a sleepwalk through, when they went to Ohio. And instead of pounding them by 22 points, they fell. Or maybe the, second coming of the game, they don't play as well, but they killed them again. Same with Buffalo, same with Kent. They've just murdered all these top teams. And I don't know how that translates into this tournament here because they should be able to crush them again because it looks out and out like they're much more talented than every one of these teams. But at plus 155, I guess I'm staying away. You mentioned the one team I'd look at, Kent State, 6-1, I think presents pretty good value there. If anyone I thought could beat Toledo, it would be Kent State. I'm honestly stunned. Ohio is plus 240 because they're basically the exact opposite of Toledo. Every time they've played one of these top teams, they've been killed. So I might throw a little on Kent State at 6-1, but Toledo is honestly, I think they probably deserve an at-large bid if they somehow get upset in this. They've been that good all year long.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's go to the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. I know you've been following this one heavy. Luckily, there is basically only one good team in this conference. So now their odds are weighted a little more heavy, so this makes it a little bit more difficult. But Norfolk State has been leaps and bounds above everybody here at minus 180. Howard, solid, but okay at 550. Coppin State plus 950. I would struggle to go any deeper than that. NC Central 14-1 has a couple players on it. After that, I don't think there's any chance any of these others could even make a dent in Maryland, Eastern Shore, South Carolina State, Oregon State, Delaware State. So what's your read here on the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference?
Yeah, this is another one that Norfolk State should run through like Iona.
Yeah. Well, that's why I thought
value.
Iona presented such good value, because Norfolk State's getting 180, and I think Iona's just as dominant in their conference as Norfolk State is in this one. So, I mean, that's why I thought Iona presented such good value, because you drop down to the Mid-Eastern Conference, and Norfolk State's almost a 2-1 favorite to run through their conference.
Yeah, you know, this may be you making to make some money in some of the games outside of Norfolk State in the head-to-head matchups, but I wouldn't take any other team to win this conference if I had to pick one.
No, that Howard at 550, who will probably be in the final with them. I'm assuming it will
Might
be.
get that
That's
in
what I
the
mean.
final.
I'm assuming it low end 380, and it probably will be hovering around like 440. So basically, you're saving yourself having to win games that might cost you that for, like plus X or, half of an odd here. Long shot wise, NC Central would be the one I'd stare at 14-1. They have some solid players on it. They can make a run. Basically, you just want them to make a run to the final, and then you can sort of split your bet there and insure it and find a way to win you some money. But overall, Norfolk State minus 180. I don't know if I'd advise, just because I don't advise taking basically any tournament favorite versus a field at minus, but I think Norfolk State should run through this one pretty good. All right, let's get to another conference you're big into, the Mountain West
favorites.
Conference. This one had some fun odds to it. Granted, our favorite pick of UNLV making the run took a dent over the weekend, but nonetheless, Boise State at plus 280, Colorado State at plus 360, San Diego State plus 370, Wyoming plus 490. The aforementioned UNLV at 9-1, Fresno State at 10-1, Utah State at 13-1. I think that probably drops off then all the teams left that probably don't really have a chance to win it. Nevada, New Mexico, Air Force, and San Jose State. If you're taking any of those, you probably should use your money elsewhere. But this one's a hard one to handicap, because honestly, the top four really, really good teams could beat each other on any given night. And then you throw in UNLV, Fresno, Utah State, I think could all easily upset any one of these teams at any point in time. So how are you handicapping this one?
Yeah, I think those top four teams should all be NCAA tournament at large bids. I think San Diego State and Wyoming are kind of fringe right now, even though I think they should all be in, because this has been a really talented conference this year. They say defense and tournament time really carries you through, and San Diego State and Boise State are the two teams with the best defense in this conference. So I like those two teams. Wyoming, I've really liked all this year, but I think the plus 490 is not quite good enough value for me to take them, just because they've struggled outside of Wyoming a little bit, and I think they've lost at least one to those top three teams ahead of them.
Yes.
But it should be a really exciting conference tournament. I think you should get some really good head-to-head matchups for sure. But, I still kind of like UNLV at plus 900. The tournament, I think, is still in Vegas, and they've shown they're capable of beating everybody. But they're going to they can't get in any holes. They're going to have to keep these games close.
Yeah, I looked at a couple here. You talked about it. The Wyoming at 490, I didn't think presented good value, especially since they're really reliant on their shooting. And in this, if they have one of those bad days, I think, like I mentioned, Utah State, Fresno State, UNLV could easily beat them, and San Diego State, Colorado State, and Boise State have already, beaten them and handled them before. So loss to New Mexico, I will admit, scared me off a little bit of UNLV after we basically had talked about it all season long. Granted, New Mexico, tough place to play. But that being said, it has not been a tough place to play all year long. New Mexico has been really, really bad. So losing a game like that, granted, the tournament was in the foreground. Maybe they threw a dud, but that scared me off. So long shot wise, I looked at Utah State. They've played some really, really good basketball at times this season. Played with a handful of these top teams, so maybe they can make a run to it. I thought 13-1 presented pretty good value, but the one I'm really looking at, San Diego State has closed this season really, really strong. Plus 370 for a team that's dominated this conference for upwards of 20 plus years now in the basketball. I think presents really, really good value. So I like that. San Diego State at plus 370. Boise State 280. I looked at, but I thought that I think I'd want it more in that Colorado State area of plus 360, just because I think they're on the same level as both Colorado State and San Diego State. So basically, we're getting 100 less points of odds here. When I think all three of those teams are on the same level, then it drops off a little bit. It should be interesting. I think the UNLV might take a flyer on. You mentioned it is in Thomas and Mack. They tend to roll and get hot in this tournament from time to time because it's in their home stadium. The only thing that concerns me, their first round matchup is versus Wyoming. They just played each other. So that makes me a little nervous, which is probably why I'm down on both Wyoming and UNLV's odds on this one. I think the true value lies with San Diego State in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think San Diego State's the best bet.
All right. This one, well, it's lost luster, let's just say. The Pac-12 Tournament, always one for surprises, but there aren't very many good teams in the Pac-12. Arizona is the favorite at minus 140, UCLA at plus 280, USC at 6-1. I draw a line there because I think there's a drop off. Oregon, who has closed terribly after we thought they were going to close wonderfully, at 12-1. Washington State, then at 27-1. Then I draw another line, and we're getting into some very, very inconsistent basketball teams. Colorado's had a solid little stretch here at 42-1. Stanford at 150. Then after that, basically, there is zero chance any of these others, I think, make a wave in this tournament. Oregon State, Arizona State, Washington, Cal, Utah. How are you handicapping this one? I see basically three teams who could probably win this tournament, but where are you sitting?
Yeah, I think that plus 1,200 for Oregon is a little generous, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'd put them more down closer to Washington State, so that's a big no-go for me.
Well, especially after what we saw as they played each other recently.
Yeah, I just, I think that's just name recognition alone is giving them those terrible odds. I don't think it's worth it. Yeah, I think the best shot to win this is between those first three. I tend to like UCLA at almost 3-1. But, I've been big on them. I've won a few bets on them. I like this Colorado team. I think they're playing really good basketball right now. Now, I think most of their significant wins have been at home, so they won't have that advantage. But I think at 42-1, it's worth a look, maybe a free bet or something, because I think they can compete with all of those teams above them on a good day. Arizona, I still can't get on board the Arizona train. They've played really well. I'm not huge on them. I'd take UCLA over Arizona on a neutral site. So that's why I think UCLA at almost 3-1 is the best value here.
Yeah, I don't think I'd take Arizona at the minus number. I just don't think there's good value there. You mentioned it. You aren't getting great value, but UCLA would probably be the one I throw money on if I had to choose someone to throw, any sort of money on. You mentioned Colorado. I do think there's pretty good value there because they do play the Oregon State winner Oregon's been awful. Oregon State has been even worse. So you think they move on to that semis, where theoretically they'd probably play Arizona, assuming they get by the Arizona State-Stanford winner. I'm pretty sure they'll do that. Then Colorado's playing Arizona, who they just beat. Granted, that being said, it was in Colorado. They will not have that advantage. So, 42-1 long shot. I don't think that's bad value. They're coached well. They have solid players. Honestly, I think they've sort of underwhelmed on their expectations at the start of the season. I think you probably thought 5 or 6 teams were going to come out of this Pac-12, and honestly, right now, 3 are coming out of this Pac-12. I guess maybe somebody might put Oregon in there, but being that they finished under Colorado in this conference, I don't know how you make a real strong case unless Oregon makes a run through this conference and probably has to beat Arizona in that said semifinal. So honestly, I don't think I'd really put a futures bet on this Pac-12 conference tournament. Maybe throw a little on UCLA, but at 280, I don't think there's really good value. There's probably better value on USC, but I have no confidence they can win 3 or 4 games in a row. Do you see any way USC can put together a run of 3 or 4 games, first good teams?
I'm not a huge believer in this SC. They tend to just have some really bad nights and are not consistent enough to string together a bunch of quality wins. Yeah.
Washington State at 27-1. They've been a little plucky here towards the end, but I once again, I just don't think they can compete with those. Yeah, certainly not Arizona or UCLA, but I don't even think they could really compete with USC. So it's hard, even though that value's okay, I'd say. All right, let's move to the Southland Conference Tournament. This one probably about a 2-team tournament here. And then we'll get into the other ones. Nicholls State at plus 115, New Orleans at plus 390, Southeast Louisiana at plus 500, Texas A&M Corpus Christi at plus 550. Pretty big drop off after that. McNeese, Houston Baptist, Northwestern State, and Incarnate Word. Probably not contenders here. What do you make of this conference tournament? I think this is a 2-person race. You could probably talk me into maybe Southeastern Louisiana and Texas A&M breaking in here.
Yeah, and like you said, in a 2-person race, I'm going to take the team getting 4-1 over the team getting 2-1 value. So I like New Orleans at plus 390.
Yeah, I'm on New Orleans here at plus 390. They were dominating this conference. Granted, they played Nicholls State twice in the last 3 weeks. They lost both of them, hence why Nicholls State is the 1 seed and New Orleans is the 2 seed here. Neither of them have had much problem with anybody else, in this conference. Might throw a little bit on, Southeastern Louisiana. They've been solid of late, but I don't think there's much value in that. Them or Texas A&M Corpus Christi, who started out hot in the conference but has really sort of tailed off and not shown really the ability to play with Nicholls State or New Orleans. So I think this is a 2-person race. 4-1 value. Really, really good, especially if this game gets to the final with Nicholls and New Orleans. We're looking at, 2-point spread, 3-point spread for Nicholls State. Yeah. And New Orleans has the best player in the conference, a guy who can score easily 30 points in a game. So I think your value there at plus 390 with New Orleans and the Privateers in this one. Pretty good value there. All right, let's move to a little one closer to home in the SEC. Kentucky comes in as favorites here at 2-1. Auburn drops to 270. Tennessee plus 370. Arkansas at 7-1. LSU at 11-1. Alabama at 16-1. And Mississippi State at 45-1. I'm putting probably a line there. And then I guess you could talk me into A&M, Florida, or South Carolina, maybe being able to do something. 55-1 for A&M, 60-1 for Florida, 120-1 to South Carolina. then we're going Vandy, Georgia, Ole Miss, Mizzou. I'm not sure there's any chance there. Vandy, 200 to 1, probably have one of the 3 best players in the conference on their roster. So I guess you could maybe talk me into that. But how are you handicapping this one?
Yeah, I think you should actually draw your line a little bit sooner. I don't know if I'd include Mississippi State in your top line there.
Well, they were on the list until a bad lost to A&M at home, and then I was like, well, I had them highlighted, and then after that loss, I had to sort of de-highlight. But they do have a coach who's been to Final Four, so.
I find it interesting that LSU is getting worse odds than Alabama here. I think LSU has really kind of dropped off a little bit, and they're maybe getting a little bit more credit for their early season start. But they didn't really play a whole lot of tough games non-conference, and they've kind of dropped the ball in conference. Now, I did think they got a little robbed last week against Arkansas. I thought there were some bad calls. I thought they had that win. And I kind of like the side of the bracket that LSU and Arkansas are in. If I were wanting to get to this conference championship game, I would want to avoid Kentucky. So being on the other side of the bracket from Kentucky, I think Kentucky, when healthy, is the best team in this conference. So for that reason, I like Arkansas at plus 700. And you know, even though I just said you want to avoid Kentucky, Alabama at plus 1,600, I think they're capable of beating anybody in this conference when they're playing well. They've proven that they can beat anybody in this country when they're playing well, as they have wins over Gonzaga and Baylor. So that's kind of where I'd be looking. I'd be looking at that Arkansas, LSU, Alabama, those 3 right there. I don't think you're getting good enough value on those top 3. I think Tennessee should probably be getting a little bit more as they've had struggles in this tournament, and I just don't know about if they match up with Kentucky, if they can beat Kentucky again at a neutral site, because Tennessee's proven that they really are only a great team at home. And like you said, neutral site's not really a road game, but it's definitely not in your home arena with your fans back.
Especially arenas like this where they're huge, and it's basically, even if you're filling the arena, it's basically an empty nest type of situation here.
Now, Tennessee does, Tennessee and Arkansas both, they play that kind of defense that's going to keep them in most games, but they also play that kind of offense where they can score 40 points in an entire game. So not a fan there. Auburn's proven really inconsistent these last few weeks. I don't think they're worth a look. So I think you've got to go with the value plays. The first one I'd look at is Arkansas at plus 700, and then maybe LSU and Alabama. That little window, I think, is where your money's going to be had.
Yeah, we're on the same, brain length of syncing here. Arkansas, LSU, Alabama. I'd bet any of those 3, see if they can make a run, because I think that's where the value is. Because basically, I think Kentucky to Alabama, all these teams are barely separated. It's random game to game. I don't think there's a real step ahead of anyone. So basically go where you're getting the most value, and that's Arkansas, LSU, and Alabama here. Kentucky's interesting because I'm just curious, one, how serious they're going to take this tournament, because I'm sure they think at 100% health, they think they can make a run in the Ncaa tournament and win a national championship. So how hard are they going to push these guys, especially a couple who've been a little bit injury prone this year? So I don't think there's any value there. We've watched Auburn sort of self-destruct a little bit here this last couple weeks. Basically I throw Auburn and Tennessee sort of in this same, it's not consistent enough of having been shown to win this tournament that they do it all that often. So at 370 and 270, I don't think that presents a whole lot of value there. So I definitely lean Arkansas, LSU, Alabama value-wise. Alabama sitting at 16 to 1, I think really is nice. That being said, they could also lose the first game they play. So, but at 16 to 1, you shouldn't be too worried. But certainly Arkansas, LSU, Alabama is definitely my value there. All right, let's go to the SWAC. I know we haven't talked anything about this one. I know a couple of these teams, so I can at least give an educated guess on this. But Texas Southern plus 190, Southern at plus 260, Alcorn State at plus 350. Certainly, these have been the three most consistent teams in this conference. I don't want to go best because these teams tend to sort of just cannibalize each other and beat each other all over the place. Who's at home plays a real advantage. But then Jackson State at 12-1, Prairie View A&M at 12-1, Florida A&M at 15-1, Alabama A&M at 20-1, and Grambling State at 32-1. You can sort of even see it with the odds, whereas like when I was talking about the odds for the bottom teams of all these other conferences, they're all in the hundreds, and 32-1 is the last place team. So basically anyone is a little bit alive in this.
This kind of reminds me of the Big 12 conference tournament where they've kind of all beat each other up all year. I like Southern's value a little bit better than Texas Southern, and I think they're just as capable of winning. So that would probably be where I'd roll with there. But I don't think any of those other guys are worth a long shot pick that you couldn't get in a head-to-head matchup.
Yeah. Texas Southern's been the most consistent team throughout Mike Davis's reign at Texas Southern, so they present a little value. Southern won this conference last year. They still got a lot of those players. If I was making a pick, I think I'd ride Alcorn State at plus 350. They've been able to beat both Southern and Texas Southern, so they've at least shown the capabilities to play with those top teams. They've also shown the capabilities of losing to some of the bottom tier teams, so, be careful. But if I was making a play, I'm probably making the play on Alcorn State. But basically, this is a pretty hard one to sort of make a play futures-wise. This is one if I was going to bet sort of game to game and look at the matchup. All right, our last conference tournament preview. I think this one's my favorite conference tournament, and this one has got a lot of deep teams in it. I see a handful who could make some runs here. New Mexico State, of course, comes in the favorite of the WAC tournament at plus 140. Grand Canyon at plus 310. Seattle at plus 440. Stephen F. Austin at plus 650. Utah Valley at 17-1. Abilene Christian at 17-1. And even Sam Houston State has played pretty good basketball this year at 36-1. Drop off there, Cal Baptist 100-1, Chicago State 500-1, and Utah Rio Grande Valley at 500-1. But pretty deep conference here. How do you think this one plays out? Where is your value, and who do you think comes out and is the overall winner here?
I think if you're going to pick a winner, I think you've got to go with New Mexico State. I think they're clearly the better overall team here. But I think my favorite play, and I think this is who you're going to end up picking, I have a sneaky suspicion. I like Stephen F. Austin at plus 650. I think they've shown that they're capable of beating all these teams, and getting that value is where I would maybe take a flyer on. But if I had to pick only one horse, I'd be taking the New Mexico State.
Yeah, I do think New Mexico State comes out and wins this, but actually, we talked about it on our show on Tuesday. I was curious about that Stephen F. Austin, New Mexico State game. Stephen F. Austin went in there, won versus New Mexico State. So 650. I think that presents the best value. Stephen F. Austin has beaten Seattle, beaten Grand Canyon. I think they've shown they probably are the second best team in this conference overall. It gets a little weird here because all these places are basically so spaced out from each other. Road and home games can be a little bit weird. But 650 value for Stephen F. Austin I think is really, really good. Grand Canyon, Seattle. I just don't think the value's there when you can get Stephen F. Austin at 650. Because I think Stephen F. Austin is as good or better than either of those teams. I think Seattle probably loses a little bit here because they won't be at home. But honestly, if you're looking for a long shot, that Utah Valley at 17-1, they've played really, really good basketball as well. They got a win over BYU this season. I don't know if they can out and outright win it, but it wouldn't shock me if they put together a couple of good games, got to that championship game. championship game at 17-1 value, really, really good value to ensure. But this should be a really, really good tournament. I mean, Sam Houston hasn't beaten any of these top teams, but they've been able to beat, all these bottom tier teams and sort of stay alive. So even they have a little bit of a shot at, 36-1, decent value there as well.
Yeah, this should be a really good, exciting matchup tournament where wouldn't be surprised to see a whole lot of different upsets happen.
Yeah. This one's one to bet on like game to game, because basically once you get out of that first round, all these games are basically going to be 1, 2, 3 point spreads because none of the teams are separated all that much from each other. So this would be a good one to bet game to game, where you don't have to worry about, big mismatches and trying to cover 6, 8, 10 point spreads in games. All right, that's our conference tournament preview.
A lot of conferences.
We got through it. Be sure to follow us on Greenlight Network, YouTube. Like, subscribe. Our Ncaa tournament pick'em contest is open for registration, so you can get in there and be ready for Sunday night when the bracket drops. You can win all the Greenlight Network swag you want. Me and the Dynamite will be back on Sunday. The show will probably come out, sometime Monday morning. But we're going to be here watching the last of the conference tournaments wrap up, and then watch the conference tournament show and shoot our Ncaa conference tournament bracket show. So be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Dynamite's still giving out his college basketball picks. Where can we find you, Dynamite?
I'm doing picks daily at GLN Dynamite _D on Twitter. I was on a little bit of a slump, but the last 3 days I've been winning a lot of money, so hop back on. We're going to get some good winning picks for all these conference tournaments. Yeah.
Be sure, like and subscribe. Sign up for the Ncaa Tournament Bracket Show. Link is below. Don't miss any of our Ncaa tournament coverage. It's going to be one hell of a couple weeks here. That's our show, and we're out.
Good! He did it! There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it on. Whitburn!